The ancient world had four great river civilizations. Mesopotamia rose along the Tigris and Euphrates. China emerged on the Yellow River. The Indus Valley civilization developed beside its namesake, but only one lasted for 3,000 continuous years: Egypt on the Nile. What made ancient Egypt so remarkably resilient? How did it outlast nearly every other civilization of the ancient world? Today we're charting the entire history of ancient Egypt, from the first farmers who settled beside the Nile's fertile banks to Cleopatra's faithful alliance with Rome. This isn't just about pyramids and mummies. It's about understanding how a civilization maintained its core identity through floods, famines, invasions, and occupations for over 30 prehistoric Egypt. Centuries, long before the Grand Pyramids cast their shadows across the desert or pharaohs claimed divine right to rule. Prehistoric Egypt was taking its first steps toward becoming one of history's most enduring civilizations. The story begins around 10,000 BCE. CE, when the harsh North African climate was actually wetter and more hospitable. Early inhabitants lived as nomadic hunter-gatherers, moving seasonally to follow game and gather wild plants. These early Egyptians left behind tantalizing clues to their existence. Stone tools scattered across ancient lake beds and rock shelters decorated with images of wildlife now extinct in the region. As the climate gradually became drier around 7,000 BCE, these nomadic groups began congregating along the Nile River, where water remained plentiful year-round. This shift marked one of humanity's most significant transitions, from hunting and gathering to settled agriculture. Early farmers cultivated barley and emo wheat, domesticated cattle and goats, and established permanent villages along the river's music banks. The Nile itself shaped every aspect of early Egyptian life. Unlike other ancient river civilizations that faced unpredictable flooding, the Nile's annual inundation occurred with remarkable regularity. Each summer, the river would rise, depositing mineral-rich silt across the floodplain. This natural fertilization created exceptionally fertile soil that supported abundant crops. The predictability of this cycle gave early Egyptians a profound sense of cosmic order that would later manifest in their religious and philosophical concepts. Early communities established complex burial practices that hint at sophisticated beliefs about death and afterlife. At Narmer Playa in southern Egypt, Stone Age people constructed one of the world's oldest astronomical observatories, around 5,000 BCE. Stone circles that tracked solstices and equinoxes, demonstrating an early understanding of celestial movements that would become central to later Egyptian religious thought. Material culture flourished as settlements grew more permanent. Distinctive pottery traditions emerged, with the black-topped redware of Upper Egypt becoming particularly characteristic. Craftspeople worked with increasingly diverse materials: bone, ivory, semi-precious stones, and eventually copper. The earliest Egyptian figurines reveal a growing artistic tradition, with representations of animals, fertility figures, and eventually human forms becoming more sophisticated over time. Music evidence of social hierarchy appeared as communities grew larger and more complex. By 4500 BCE, certain graves contained noticeably more elaborate goods than others, suggesting the emergence of elite groups who commanded greater resources. These social distinctions would eventually lead to the chiefdoms and proto-kingdoms of the late prehistoric period. The people of prehistoric Egypt weren't isolated. Archaeological evidence reveals extensive trade networks reaching into the Levant, Nubia, and even the distant Red Sea coast. Copper from Sinai, gold from Nubia, and shells from the Mediterranean all found their way into Egyptian communities, demonstrating sophisticated exchange networks thousands of years before formal international diplomacy. Music existed. By 4000 BCE, distinct regional cultures had emerged along the Nile. In the north, the Mai culture developed close connections with the App, while in southern Egypt, the Badarian and later Nakata cultures created increasingly complex societies. The Nakata culture, named after its type site near modern Luxor, would eventually expand northward, laying the groundwork for Egypt's eventual unification. In the final centuries of the prehistoric era, competing centers of power emerged. Archaeological sites like Karampolis revealed the existence of walled towns with monumental buildings, craft workshops, and evidence of specialized labor. At Abydos, elaborate tombs suggest powerful rulers commanding substantial resources. These protoates, each controlling sections of the Nile Valley, were the immediate predecessors to the unified Egyptian state. From these fragmented protoates, unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, emerged perhaps the most consequential political event of the ancient world, a unification so profound that its symbols would still adorn royal regalia 3,000 years later. Around 3,100 BCE, CE, as bronze tools were spreading throughout Mesopotamia and Stonehenge's earliest structures were being built, King Nar accomplished what had previously seemed impossible. The ruler from Upper Egypt, the southern region, launched a military campaign that successfully conquered Lower Egypt in the north, forging the world's first territorial nation-state under a single authority. The story of this momentous unification survives most vividly through the Nar palette, a ceremonial cosmetic slab carved from siltstone. This remarkable artifact tells a visual story across its two sides. On one, Nar wears the white crown of Upper Egypt and inspects decapitated enemies. On the other, he wears the red crown of Lower Egypt while striking down a northern foe. The palette doesn't just commemorate a military victory. It establishes a visual language of kinship that would persist throughout Egyptian history, making it the first example of propagandistic historical narrative and art. The political genius of Narmer's unification wasn't simply in conquest, but in how he legitimized his rule. Rather than merely subjugating Lower Egypt, he positioned himself as the rightful ruler of both regions, creating a dual identity that became the foundation for Egyptian kingship. This innovation in political theology gave birth to the concept of the king as both earthly ruler and divine mediator, establishing the framework for what would later evolve into the Pharaonic institution. Building upon its historical centrality, the Nile's geographic midpoint became a natural choice for Memphis, symbolizing the political and cultural convergence of Egypt's two regions. Archaeological evidence suggests Nar likely founded the settlement as white walls, with later kings expanding it into the administrative and religious center that would serve as Egypt's capital for 8 music centuries. The visual symbolism of unification extended to royal regalia as well. The most iconic symbol became the double crown piscant, which physically combined the white crown of Upper Egypt with the red crown of Lower Egypt. When worn together, these previously competing symbols created a powerful visual metaphor for the newly unified state. Similarly, the royal titular began incorporating dual elements. The sedge plant symbolizing Upper Egypt and the bee representing Lower Egypt and the bee representing Lower Egypt became standard elements and royal names. Interestingly, D, despite our modern association of ancient Egyptian rulers with the title Pharaoh, this term wouldn't enter regular usage until over 1,000 years after unification. During Narmer's time, the ruler was known by titles like he of the two ladies, Nepti or Jewel King, emphasizing his role as ruler of previously separate lands. The word pharaoh, derived from the Egyptian term for great house, originally referred to the royal palace rather than the king himself. Beyond symbolic changes, unification catalyzed practical innovations necessary for governing a vast territory. The need to administer a unified state accelerated the development of hieroglyphic writing, with some of the earliest known examples dating to this period. Standardized measurement systems, centralized tax collection, and organized religious practices all emerged as solutions to the challenges of ruling the newly expanded kingdom. Pottery styles and artistic conventions that had previously varied by region began to homogenize, creating a cohesive cultural identity. This transformation from competing regional powers to a unified state represents one of history's most successful examples of nation-building. Unlike many ancient conquests that quickly dissolved after a ruler's death, Narmer's unification created a state structure so resilient that it would maintain its essential identity for 3 millennia, despite periods of fragmentation and foreign rule. Narmer's successor kings inherited more early dynastic period than just a unified territory. They faced the monumental task of inventing an entire system of governance from scratch. As the dust of unification settled, Egypt entered what scholars now call the early dynastic period, circa 3100 to 2686 BCE, encompassing the first and second dynasties. These pioneering rulers transformed Ner's military achievement into something far more enduring, a functioning civilization with distinctive cultural, religious, and administrative practices. Memphis became the administrative heart of this new nation, strategically positioned at the junction of Upper and Lower Egypt. Building on earlier innovations, writing systems became more refined under the early dynastic kings, evolving more symbolic use into a practical tool for state governance. Royal names now appeared enclosed in rectangular frames, called sureks, forerunners of the Khat, that would later become synonymous with Egyptian royalty. These early hieroglyphics reveal a rapidly evolving system designed primarily for practical governance rather than literary expression. The evolution of royal burial practices during this period offers perhaps the most striking window into early dynastic society. At Abydos, archaeologists have uncovered massive tomb complexes surrounded by rows of smaller subsidiary burials. Initial excavations revealed something disturbing. These subsidiary graves contained the bodies of court officials, servants, and craftspeople who had been sacrificed to accompany their king into the afterlife. The royal tomb of King Djer contained the remains of nearly 600 sacrificed retainers. This practice of retainer sacrifice, which would be utterly abandoned by later Egyptian civilizations, demonstrates how the emerging concept of divine kingship justified extreme measures during this experimental phase. To manage their expanding territory, early dynastic kings divided Egypt into administrative regions called nomes, each overseen by a provincial governor or nomarch. This nome system created Egypt's first formal bureaucratic structure, allowing for effective taxation and resource management across the newly unified land. Remarkably, this provincial framework would endure for thousands of years, demonstrating how fundamentally sound these earliest administrative experiences proved to be. This period saw the beginnings of a religious ideology that would later portray the king as both a divine presence in life and a figure united with the gods after death. Architectural innovations heralded future developments. The traditional mud brick mastaba tombs, rectangular structures with sloping sides covering underground burial chambers, grew increasingly elaborate. Some royal tombs began incorporating stone elements, packaging the revolutionary all-stone monuments that would define the next era. These early experiments with stone construction represented a significant technological leap requiring new skills and organizational capabilities. The period wasn't without conflict. Evidence suggests tensions between competing power centers, particularly during the Second Dynasty, when inscriptions hint at religious conflicts concerning the gods Horus and Seth. The final Second Dynasty king Khazaway appears to have reunified Egypt after some form of internal strife, as suggested by his name, meaning the two powers appear in his unprecedented use of both Horus and Seth symbols in his royal titulary. Artistically early, dynastic craftsmen established conventions that would define Egyptian aesthetic for thousands of years. The distinctive profile view of human figures, hierarchical scaling to indicate importance, and the grid system for proportional representation. Early masterpieces like the ivory figure of King Den and the running pose already display the sophistication that would characterize Egyptian artistic production. The Old Kingdom begins. The story of how Egypt became one of history's greatest civilizations enters a transformative chapter with Dynasty III. Around 2686 CE, as King Djoser ascended the throne, Egypt stood at the precipice of an extraordinary evolution. The relatively modest kingdom of the early dynastic period was about to become something unprecedented, a society capable of architectural achievements that would remain unrivaled for King Djoser's ambition changed the course of human history when he commissioned his brilliant vizier Imhotep to create his eternal resting place. Breaking from the tradition of mud brick mastabas, Imhotep designed what would become the step pyramid complex at Saqqara. A revolutionary leap in both scale and material. Rising 204 feet high with 6 distinct tiers, this massive structure required approximately 850,000 tons of limestone, and marked humanity's first monumental stone building. The psychological impact of this achievement cannot be overstated. Before Dioa, royal tombs, while impressive, remained fundamentally impermanent, built from materials that would eventually erode. The step pyramid proclaimed something entirely new, that the king's power transcended time itself. As the sun caught the polished, white limestone casing stones, the structure would have appeared to literally glow on the horizon, a permanent manifestation of royal divinity visible for miles across the Nile Valley. The complex surrounding the pyramid reveals the sophisticated spatial understanding of Imhotep's design. Enclosed by a massive wall stretching 1,640 feet long and 900 feet wide, the ceremonial courtyard contained numerous ritual structures, including the said festival court, where the king would perform renewal rituals, proving his continued fitness to rule. These structures, initially built in perishable materials like wood and reed, were brilliantly translated into permanent stone, an architectural innovation that demonstrated stone's potential as a flexible building material. Imhotep's genius extended beyond architecture. As Diosa's chief minister and high priest of the creator god Ptah, he embodied the Egyptian ideal of the polymath. His comprehensive knowledge encompassed medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and theology. Such was his lasting reputation that centuries after his death, he achieved something almost impossible in Egyptian society: deification without royal blood. By the late period, Egyptians worshipped him as a god of healing and wisdom, with pilgrims traveling to a sanctuary, seeking music, cures. The Old Kingdom witnessed the full flowering of the concept of divine kingship. While earlier kings had associated themselves with gods, Old Kingdom pharaohs were now understood to be living manifestations of Horus and life in Osiris after death. This theological framework positioned the king as the essential intermediary between humanity and the divine realm, the linchpin that maintained cosmic music order. This cosmic order centered on the concept of Mahat, often symbolized as a feather or a seated goddess wearing that feather. More than just truth or justice, Mahat represented the fundamental harmony of the universe. When pharaohs claimed to live by Mahat, they asserted their role as guarantors of cosmic stability. The king's proper performance of rituals, maintenance of temples, and defense of Egypt's borders were considered essential to preventing the world from falling into chaos. To execute their divine mandate, Old Kingdom rulers developed what may have been the world's first true bureaucracy. A sophisticated administrative system emerged with specialized titles and offices. The hierarchy extended from viziers, chief ministers, down through overseers, scribes, and tax collectors. Monuments from this period proudly record titles like Overseer of all the king's works and Keeper of the Royal Archives, suggesting a complex governmental apparatus employing thousands of administrators across the Nile Valley. While Imhotep's step pyramid, Age of the Pyramids, revolutionized Egyptian architecture, what followed would dwarf it in scale and precision. How could a civilization without modern tools create structures so perfectly aligned to the stars that they deviate from true north by less than 360th of a degree? The answer lies in the 4th dynasty, 2613 to 2494 BCE, when pyramid construction reached its zenith under the pharaohs Khufu Khafre and Manar. Their monumental tombs at Giza represent the pinnacle of ancient Egyptian engineering and organizational capacity. Khufu's Great Pyramid initially stood 146.6 m tall, containing approximately 2.3 million stone blocks, weighing between 2.5 and 15 tons each. The mathematical precision is staggering. The base forms an almost perfect square, with sides differing by mere centime, despite spanning more than 230 points. The construction process involved a complex network of specialized workers, far beyond what most people imagine. Contrary to Hollywood depictions, these monuments weren't built by masses of slaves, but by rotating teams of skilled Egyptian laborers, supplemented by seasonal agricultural workers during the annual Nile flood, when farming was impossible. Archaeological excavations at workers' villages reveal evidence of well-fed laborers who received medical care and were organized into competitive teams with playful names. Graffiti inside unfinished pyramids includes monikers like Friends of Khufu and Drunkards of Menari. These massive projects required unprecedented logistical coordination. Special harbors were constructed to receive limestone from Tura and granite from Aswan, hundreds of kilometers away. Copper tools had to be constantly resharpened as they wore down against the hard stone. Food production had to increase to feed the part workforce, and specialized artisans were needed to create the intricate interior chambers and passages. The entire enterprise represents history's first large-scale, state-organized project made possible by Egypt's sophisticated bureaucracy. Beyond their architectural magnificence, the pyramids served as cosmic machinery. In Egyptian religious thought, the straight passages were precisely aligned to specific stars, particularly those in Orion's belt, which Egyptians associated with Osiris, god of the afterlife. The pyramid shape itself represented the primordial mound from which creation emerged and symbolized the sun's rays descending to earth. These weren't simply tombs, they were launch pads designed to rocket the deceased pharaoh to his place among the celestial gods. A music inside Khufu's pyramid, the king's chamber contains peculiar features that still puzzle archaeologists, including air shafts that don't actually ventilate the room, but instead point directly toward key stars in the ancient Egyptian sky. The sarcophagus in this chamber was too large to have been brought in through the existing passages, meaning it was placed there during construction, evidence of the meticulous advanced planning these projects required. The social implications of pyramid building were profound. These massive projects reinforced the pharaoh's godlike power by demonstrating his ability to marshal resources and labor on an unprecedented scale. Yet they also fostered a sense of national identity and purpose, uniting thousands in a shared enterprise that transcended local affiliations. The specialized knowledge developed during construction, from astronomy to engineering, mathematics to project management, created an intellectual legacy that influenced Egyptian civilization for millennia. After the Fourth Dynasty, pyramid building continued, but never again reached the same scale or precision. The Fifth Dynasty pharaohs built smaller pyramids while diverting more resources to sun temples. By the Sixth Dynasty, the quality declined further as royal power gradually declined further as royal power gradually diminished. The Great Age of Pyramids lasted only a few generations, yet it represented ancient Egypt at its most powerful and organized, a society capable of achievements that would remain unmatched for thousands of years. The rise of the pharaoh, while the diminishing scale of pyramids, masked a profound transformation taking place within Egyptian society. As physical monuments became smaller, the concept of divine kinship expanded exponentially, creating a system where the pharaoh embodied an entire cosmic order, not just ruling people, but serving as the living bridge between humanity and the gods. This transformation wasn't accidental, but calculated. The pharaoh now stood at the apex of a sophisticated theological system that presented him as the guarantor of universal harmony. Every morning when the pharaoh awoke, the sun rose, not merely by coincidence, but because the king, as the earthly manifestation of the divine, performed the necessary rituals to ensure cosmic continuation. When he officiated ceremonies, he wasn't just leading religious observances, but literally maintaining the order of creation itself. The physical manifestations of royal power became increasingly complex. The pharaoh was rarely seen without his full regalia, the curved crook representing his role as shepherd of his people, the flail symbolizing his authority to punish, and the distinctive name's headdress with its striped cloth framing his face. These weren't simply decorative elements, but visual theology, transforming the human king into a recognizable divine figure whose very appearance reinforced his supernatural status. Throughout temple walls across Egypt, a curious motif appeared with remarkable consistency, scenes of the pharaoh violently striking down enemies. What makes these smiting scenes fascinating is that many were carved during periods of peace when no actual military campaigns were underway. These images served as magical protection, ritual acts frozen in stone, the pharaoh perpetually defeating the forces of chaos to maintain cosmic order. The enemy figures weren't necessarily historical opponents, but personifications of disorder itself. The crowning opponent's associative royal authority necessitated expansion of the administrative apparatus. The office of vizier evolved into the most powerful non-royal position in the kingdom. Often drawn from elite families or occasionally from the king's own relatives, the vizier oversaw justice, taxation, and most crucial government functions. Every morning, the vizier would meet with the pharaoh to discuss affairs of state before carrying the royal will throughout the bureaucracy. In the king's absence, the vazir's authority was nearly absolute, making him indispensable to governance, yet always subordinate to divine kingship. The economic dimensions of pharaonic power expanded dramatically throughout the temple system. Massive temple complexes weren't simply houses of worship, but economic powerhouses that controlled vast agricultural estates, workshops, and labor forces. Records show that by the height of the New Kingdom, temple domains collectively controlled approximately 1/3 of Egypt's arable land. Each donation the pharaoh made to a temple, whether land, cattle, or precious materials, strengthened both divine and royal authority by creating centers of production and distribution tied directly to pharaonic legitimacy. The theological foundation supporting royal power evolved as well. The solar cult of Ra gained unprecedented prominence, with pharaohs increasingly incorporating Son of Ra into their titular. This divine sonship wasn't metaphorical but literal in Egyptian theological terms. The king was believed to be physically generated by the sun god's divine essence infused into the queen through supernatural means. Each pharaoh thus became a living manifestation of divine power, connecting Egypt directly to cosmic forces. The divine power that flowed the decline of the Old Kingdom through pharaohs couldn't prevent what came next. A collapse so profound it challenged the very foundation of Egyptian cosmology. What force could possibly topple a diphilization where kings commanded the sun to rise and maintain universal order through their mere existence? The answer lies in a perfect storm that Egyptian theology never prepared them for. Around 2200 BCE, climate records reveal a severe drying trend across northeast Africa and the Middle East. The Nile, Egypt's eternal lifeline, began behaving unpredictably. Years of low floods created agricultural devastation that the centralized state couldn't address. These environmental catastrophes struck at the heart of pharaonic legitimacy. If the king truly controlled cosmic forces, why were the fields barren and storehouses empty? As harvests failed year after year, the carefully constructed administrative apparatus began to crumble. Tax revenues plummeted while food prices soared, creating a fiscal crisis. The vast bureaucracy that had directed pyramid construction and managed national resources could no longer be maintained. More significantly, the ideology of divine kingship suffered a devastating blow. How could the people trust a living God who couldn't deliver the most basic necessity, food? Archaeological evidence at provincial cemeteries tells a revealing story. Nomarchs, who once served as extensions of royal authority, began styling themselves as independent rulers. Their tomb inscriptions no longer emphasized loyalty to the pharaoh, but instead highlighted their own. One provincial governor named Anchifi proclaimed himself the great overlord of the nome and boasted, "I gave bread to the hungry and clothing to the me. Naked, I brought life to the provinces when the sky was clouded and the earth parched with thirst." Such declarations would have been unthinkable during the height of Old Kingdom power, when only the pharaoh could claim credit for Egypt's music prosperity. The rapid decentralization created a political domino effect. As nomarchs gained independence, they redirected local resources away from the capital. Memphis, once the beating heart of Egypt's administrative network, gradually lost influence over distant provinces. Reduced revenues meant the pharaoh could no longer commission massive building projects or maintain extensive temple staffs, further eroding both practical authority and divine legitimacy. Pepe II, the last significant ruler of Dynasty VI, embodied this decline. Traditional sources claim he ruled for an astonishing 94 years, which modern scholars believe contributed to the instability. As he aged, real power diffused among competing factions at court, while distant provinces slipped further from central control. By the end of his reign, Egypt had transformed from a unified kingdom into a collection of autonomous territories, with only nominal allegiance to the throne. The weakening of central authority allowed regional religious practices to flourish. Local temple complexes dedicated to provincial deities gained prominence, challenging the royal cults that had dominated Old Kingdom religion. Provincial elites redirected resources to local temples, instead of royal monuments, permanently altering Egypt's religious landscape. The cosmic powers once channeled exclusively through the pharaoh were now dispersed among a multitude of local cults and priesthoods. The magnificent pyramids that had symbolized Old Kingdom splendor gave the way to modest structures built with inferior materials and craftsmanship. The last royal pyramid of the Old Kingdom, belonging to Pepe Teke, shows markedly reduced scale and quality compared to its predecessors. After his death, even these diminished monuments became impossible to sustain. By 2160 BCE, central authority had disintegrated entirely. The United Kingdom fractured into competing territories, ruled by provincial dynasties. Memphis lost its status as the sole capital, with rival centers emerging at Heracleopolis and Middle Egypt and Thebes in the south. What followed was an era of regional conflicts, competing royal claims, and cultural transformation known as the First Intermediate Period. While Memphis faded from glory, First Intermediate Period, two ambitious cities prepared to battle for Egypt's soul. Between Heracleopolis in the north and Thebes in the south lay not just geographical distance, but fundamentally different visions for what Egypt could become after the divine kingship model had failed so spectacularly. During this fragmented era, lasting from approximately 2160 to 2055 BCE, Egypt experienced something unexpected, a cultural renaissance amid political chaos. The collapse of centralized authority created space for regional innovation. Local workshops developed distinctive artistic styles free from the rigid conventions previously dictated by royal artisans. Provincial tombs at sites like Moala and Golin show experimentation with new motifs and compositions that would have been unthinkable under Old Kingdom standardization. The Northern Kingdom, centered at Heracleopolis, was founded by Keti the High, who established the Nine dynasty around 2160 BCE. His successors controlled the fertile Delta region and parts of Middle Egypt, giving them access to Mediterranean trade networks. These rulers legitimized their authority by emphasizing their role as protectors against banditry and lawlessness, a pressing concern. In a time of widespread food shortages, the Southern Kingdom, based at Thebes, grew gradually under local governors who eventually declared their independence as the 11th dynasty. These Theban rulers had access to gold mines in the eastern desert and trade routes to Nubia, providing critical resources for their growing ambitions. Early Theban kings like Infant Entetu expanded their territory northward, directly challenging Heracleopolitan control. One fascinating aspect of this period is how rulers were forced to justify their authority through action rather than divine right. Tomb inscriptions from this era are remarkably candid about a leader's concrete achievements. "I gave bread to the hungry and clothes to the naked," boasts one provincial governor, language that reveals a new social contract where protection and provision, not divine heritage, earned loyalty. This political fragmentation sparked a literary explosion that included Egypt's first works of political commentary and social criticism. The Instruction for King Merare, composed by a Heracleopolitan king for his son, offers remarkably practical advice. "Be skilled in speech that you may be strong." Speech is stronger than any weapon. Rather than claiming divine infallibility, these texts acknowledged the challenges of governing in uncertain times. The Admonitions of Epuer presents an even more striking departure from traditional Egyptian optimism. This remarkable text depicts a world completely overturned. The poor man is full of joy, the wealthy man is sorrowful. He who never built for himself now owns bullocks. Some scholars interpret this as a reaction to actual social upheaval, while others see it as a cautionary tale, warning against the consequences of abandoning traditional hierarchy. Archaeology reveals that provincial elites flourished during this period of reduced central control. Tombs at Asiut and Beni Hassa showcase elaborate decoration and funeral equipment that, in some cases, surpassed those of contemporary kings. Local governors constructed impressive rock-cut tombs adorned with scenes of hunting, fishing, and agricultural abundance. Displays of wealth that would have been politically impossible under strong pharaonic rule. Bases, the First Intermediate Period, created a unique window of opportunity for social mobility. Tomb biographies describe individuals who rose from humble beginnings to positions of authority based on competence rather than birth. Fragmentation, while politically chaotic, allowed talent to surface in ways the rigid Old Kingdom hierarchy had prevented. Park, music after nearly a century of division. Theban King Menutep II began a successful campaign of reunification around 2055 BCE. Through military campaigns and strategic marriages, he gradually extended the control northward. His victory was commemorated in his innovative mortuary complex at Deir el-Bahari, which combined traditional pyramid elements with new architectural features reflecting Egypt's changed cultural rise of the Middle Kingdom landscape. From the ashes of the first intermediate period emerged not a simple restoration of old ways, but something revolutionary. While history remembers Mentuhotep II as Egypt's second unifier, what's often overlooked is how this reunification fundamentally rewrote the contract between ruler and ruled in ways that would echo through Egyptian civilization for the next thousand. Musication. After securing military victory, Mentuhotep I faced the formidable challenge of healing a fractured society. The reunified kingdom required a new governing philosophy. Unlike the Old Kingdom pharaohs who ruled from distinct Memphis, the Middle Kingdom rulers established their power center at Thebes, signaling a dramatic shift in Egypt's political geography. This was not merely a change of address. It represented a complete recalibration of Egyptian culture, religion, and governance. The rise of Thebes brought profound religious changes. The local deity, Amun, previously a minor god, began an ascent that would eventually transform him into Almana, the supreme state god. Royal propaganda skillfully merged this Thean deity with older traditions, creating theological continuity while establishing new religious authority. Mentuhotep II's coronation name, Neb-Petra, meaning Lord of the Rudder, his raw, explicitly connected him to solar theology while maintaining distinctly Theban roots. Middle Kingdom rulers revolutionized the relationship between pharaoh and subject. Royal inscriptions and literature from this period reveal a remarkable shift in how kingship was framed. The famous tale of the eloquent peasant presents a narrative where even a common farmer could demand justice from the system. This new ideal of accessible kingship was captured in texts advising rulers to speak mat dammat, suggesting that divine order wasn't simply enforced from above, but actively performed through righteous governance. Architecture reflected this political transformation. Mentuhotep II's mortuary complex at Deir el-Bahari represents an architectural turning point, a structure built into the cliffs that combine elements of traditional pyramids with colonnaded terraces. This innovative design incorporated both upper and lower Egyptian elements, visually representing reunification while establishing a new architectural language that would inspire later music monuments. The administrative system underwent complete reorganization. The Middle Kingdom introduced new titles and offices with particular emphasis on provincial administration. The post of overseer of sealed things became especially important in managing Egypt's revitalized trade networks. Administrative papyri reveals sophisticated record-keeping systems, tracking everything from agricultural production to expedition, music, personnel. Economic recovery demanded aggressive expansionism. The pharaohs dispatched military expeditions southward, establishing fortresses along the Nubian frontier at strategic locations like Buanya and Semna. These weren't merely defensive structures. They controlled crucial trade routes, accessing sub-Saharan Africa's resources. The Middle Kingdom saw renewed mining operations in the Sinai turquoise mines and expeditions to exotic locations like Punt, possibly modern Somalia, where ships returned with myrrh trees, ivory, and exotic music animals. Military innovation accompanied this expansion. Middle Kingdom armies introduced composite bows, improved body armor, and the devastating Kulf-curved sword. The period's literature includes tactical texts describing ideal formation movements and battlefield strategies, revealing a newly professionalized military establishment. Literature blossomed during this Renaissance. The Middle Kingdom produced some of ancient Egypt's most enduring literary works. Philosophical wisdom texts, like the Instructions of Amenemhat, coexisted with adventure tales like The Shipwrecked Sailor and contemplative works like the dialogue of a man with his ba about the nature of death. These texts reveal a society engaged in cultural self-reflection, questioning traditional assumptions about authority, mortality, and meaning. Artistic conventions underwent dramatic transformation. Middle Kingdom sculpture abandoned the idealized perfection of Old Kingdom models, introducing naturalistic elements, including furrowed brows, lined faces, and expressions suggesting inner psychological states. Royal portraiture sometimes featured surprisingly realistic depictions of aging pharaohs, a significant departure from early, artistic traditions emphasizing divine, golden age of the Middle Kingdom. Perfection. Those naturalistic royal portraits, revealing the burden of leadership, weren't merely artistic choices. They reflected the immense responsibilities shouldered by the 12th dynasty pharaohs, as marshlands transformed into farmland, and fortress chains stretched along distant borders. Egypt entered a period of such remarkable achievement that even the pharaohs themselves began receiving divine worship during their music lifetimes. The 12th dynasty, stretching from approximately 1991 to 1802 B. CETD, brought Egypt to unprecedented heights of administrative efficiency and cultural sophistication. The dynasty's founder, Amen, the first established patterns of governance that his successors would perfect over nearly 2 centuries of stable rule. The throne passed smoothly, from father to son, with remarkable consistency, a stark contrast to the fragmentation that had plagued earlier periods. Under Senus I, Egypt's second 12th dynasty ruler, the kingdom embarked on an ambitious building program that would eventually dot the Nile Valley with monuments. This pharaoh commissioned temples from the Delta to the Nubian frontier, including significant expansions at Karnak, where he erected massive granite pillars and established foundations that would support Egypt's most sacred complex for centuries to come. The Fiume region witnessed the dynasty's most impressive engineering achievements. This natural depression southwest of Memphis had been mostly marshland, but the pharaohs, particularly Amen III, transformed it through a complex network of canals, dikes, and irrigation systems. The centerpiece was the creation of Lake Moeris, an enormous artificial reservoir that captured floodwaters and released them during dry seasons. This hydrological marvel effectively extended Egypt's agricultural capacity by thousands of acres, supporting population growth and generating agricultural surplus that funded further state expansion. In the realm of foreign policy, Senus III emerged as the dynasty's most formidable military strategist. Unlike the campaigns of later New Kingdom pharaohs, which focused on territorial conquest, Senus's Nubian expeditions aimed to secure economic interests, particularly gold, mines, and trade routes. His strategy involved a sophisticated combination of military intimidation and infrastructure development, exemplified by a series of massive fortresses constructed at regular intervals along the Nubian frontier. These fortresses represented military engineering on an unprecedented scale. Sites like Urinadi and Shak featured double walls up to 10 m thick, defensive ditches, and purpose-built barracks capable of housing hundreds of soldiers. But they weren't purely military installations. They also functioned as administrative centers with workshops, granaries, and bureaucratic offices that managed the flow of goods between Egypt and its southern neighbors. The cultural achievements of the 12th dynasty were equally impressive. Court artists developed a distinctive style that captured the psychological weight of kingship. Statues of Senus III with their furrowed brows and downturned mouths reveal a ruler who understood the burden of his position. This artistic breakthrough suggests a profound shift in how kingship was conceptualized. No longer just a divine entitlement, but a serious responsibility requiring wisdom and effort. Legal innovations transformed Egyptian society during this golden age. Standardized legal procedures developed with evidence and surviving papyri of formalized protocols for land transfers, inheritance disputes, and criminal proceedings. The role of judges became increasingly specialized, and local courts operated with standardized methods across the kingdom. The 12th dynasty pharaohs built a government structure remarkable for its time, a balance between central authority and regional administration. Provincial governors remained powerful, but were checked by royal overseers who reported directly to the vizier. This sophisticated checks and balances system allowed the bureaucracy to function efficiently while preventing the independence that had undermined DLP music dynasties. For all its achievements, the decline and Second Intermediate Period, Middle Kingdom rested on foundations more fragile than its monument suggested. The very systems that had elevated Egypt to unprecedented heights contained vulnerabilities that, when exploited, would usher in an era so chaotic that later Egyptians would nearly erase it from their historical music records. The twilight of the 13th dynasty marked the beginning of the end. Unlike the strong hereditary succession of the 12th dynasty, these later rulers occupied the throne for increasingly shorter periods, some reigning mere months before being replaced. This rapid turnover created administrative instability that rippled throughout the kingdom. With each new pharaoh came shifts in policy and personnel, gradually undermining the bureaucratic machine that had maintained Egypt's golden age. As central authority weakened, Egypt's borders became increasingly porous. The Delta region, always Egypt's most vulnerable frontier, saw a gradual infiltration of Canaanite peoples from the Levant. These newcomers weren't conquering armies, but rather immigrants seeking opportunities in Egypt's still prosperous northern territories. They settled in trading centers like Avaris, slowly integrating into Egyptian society while maintaining connections to their music homeland. The final collapse came around 1650 BCE when a group of these Asiatic settlers, known to Egyptians as the Echkos, meaning rulers of foreign lands, established political control over the Delta. Under King Sositus, they declared themselves Egypt's 15th dynasty, controlling the richest agricultural region while relegating native Egyptian rulers to subordinate music status. What makes the Hyksos takeover fascinating isn't just that it happened, but how it happened. Unlike later invasions by Assyrians or Persians, the Hyksos transition was more corporate merger than hostile takeover. Archaeological evidence from Avaris reveals a city with distinctly Levantine architecture and burial customs existing alongside traditional Egyptian elements. Seals and scarabs show Hyksos kings with thoroughly Egyptian royal titles and iconography, while maintaining their foreign names and cultural distinctiveness. The military revolution they brought transformed warfare in North Africa permanently. Having originated in the militarized zone between Mesopotamia and Egypt, the Hyksos introduced horse-drawn chariots with composite wheels designed for speed rather than weight. These mobile platforms allowed archers to strike and retreat before infantry could respond, a tactical advantage Egypt had never encountered. The Hyksos also brought improved metallurgy, producing bronze weapons stronger than anything in Egypt's, particularly thieves. Native Egyptian dynasties maintained independence. The archaeological record shows the 17th dynasty rulers gradually adopting Hyksos military innovations while cultivating a narrative of resistance against foreign domination. Tombs from this period reveal a strong duality, traditionally Egyptian in many respects, yet incorporating foreign weapons and military imagery. What makes this period particularly difficult to reconstruct is the scarcity of official documentation. Administrative papyri virtually disappear compared to the meticulous record-keeping of the Middle Kingdom. Historians piece together events from private inscriptions, archaeological remains, and later accounts that are colored by nationalistic sentiment. Even determining the sequence of kings during this period remains contentious among scholars. The Hyksos period wasn't simply a dark age of foreign oppression, as later Egyptian propagandists would claim. Cultural exchange flowed in both directions. Hyksos rulers adopted Egyptian administrative practices, worshipped Egyptian deities, particularly Set, who became associated with their storm god, and employed Egyptian-style monumental architecture. Religious texts from this period show innovative theological combinations that would influence later traditions. Beauty after nearly a century of divided rule, tensions between thieves and avarice escalated into open conflict. The mummy of Theban king Second Nenri tells a violent story. His skull bears multiple wounds from Hyksos-style battle axes, suggesting he died in combat against northern forces. His son Kamos continued the struggle, leaving behind a victory, stellar that captures the nationalistic fervor of the resistance. Why do I contemplate my strength while there is a ruler in Avaris and another in Kush, and I sit united with an Asiatic and a Nubian, each man holding his slice of Egypt? The New Kingdom began not with the rise of the New Kingdom whimper, but with a resounding victory that would alter Egypt's destiny forever. After a century of foreign rule under the Hyksos, Ahmose, a determined Theban prince, launched a relentless campaign to reclaim Egypt's sovereignty and dignity. Following in the footsteps of his father, second in right Tao, and brother Kimmos, who had both died fighting the Hyksos, Ahmose finally succeeded in driving the foreign rulers from Egyptian soil around 1550 BCE, reunifying the fractured nation and establishing the 18th dynasty. This victory represented more than simple liberation. It fundamentally transformed Egypt's worldview. Bitter memories of foreign domination left an indelible mark on Egyptian consciousness, creating a lasting determination to prevent such humiliation from ever happening again. The once insular kingdom now adopted an aggressive military posture, pushing outward to create buffer zones and secure its frontiers against potential threats. Egypt was no longer content with splendid isolation. It sought to control its destiny by dominating neighboring music lands. The military that made this expansion possible underwent a complete revolution in tactics and organization. The Egyptians, ironically, learned from their former Hyksos rulers, adopting and improving upon their military innovations. The chariot became the centerpiece of Egyptian warfare, a mobile platform from which archers could re-arrows on enemy formations before swift retreat. Military careers became prestigious pathways to power, with successful generals often rewarded with vast estates and political influence. The army itself became a permanent institution rather than an ad hoc force raised for specific campaigns. Thebes remained the spiritual and administrative heart of this new Egypt, its importance reinforced by massive construction projects that celebrated the victorious dynasty. But the true power behind the throne increasingly rested with the priesthood of Amun, who had supported the Theban royal family during their struggle against the Hyksos. In gratitude, Ahmose and his successors lavished unprecedented wealth and authority upon Amun's temples, elevating this once regional deity to unprecedented prominence. The merging of Amun with the sun god, Ra, created a supreme deity whose earthly representatives wielded immense political and economic power. Music, the economic engine that fueled this new imperial age, ran on the gold mines of Nubia, the tribute of conquered peoples, and the reopening of trade routes that had been disrupted during the Second Intermediate Period. Ahmose not only rebuilt what had been destroyed, but expanded Egypt's infrastructure, commissioning new quarries and trading expeditions to secure the luxury goods that the elite craved. Stone, timber, and exotic materials flowed into Egypt in quantities never before seen, enabling a construction boom that would reshape the landscape. Military conquest alone did not secure Egypt's new position. Diplomatic marriages, treaties, and a careful placement of loyal administrators created a complex network of relationships that bound foreign territories to Egyptian interests. The story stops. The children of foreign rulers were often brought to Egypt for education, a form of honored hostage, taking that ensured their parents' continued loyalty, while simultaneously exposing the next generation of leaders to Egyptian culture and values. The court culture that developed during this period reflected Egypt's new cosmopolitan character. Foreign influences in art, language, and fashion became prestigious, rather than rejected. The royal family embraced certain aspects of international style, while maintaining distinctly Egyptian religious practices and royal iconography. This cultural flowering would reach its peak in the successive reigns of Hatshepsut and Thutmose III, when Egyptian art and architecture achieved new heights of refinement and Egypt becomes an empire expression. This pragmatic adaptation of foreign ideas would soon yield dividends beyond anything Egypt's rulers could have imagined. At its height, Egypt's empire stretched over 2,000 m from north to south, with conquered territories sending a steady stream of resources directly to the pharaoh's treasury. The ambitious rulers of the Sar 18th dynasty transformed what had begun as a defensive strategy into an unprecedented imperial machine. Thutmose pushed Egypt's boundaries further than any previous ruler, campaigning deep into Syria and establishing a frontier at the Euphrates River. This remarkable expansion was commemorated when he erected a victory stela beside the river, declaring Egypt's northeastern boundary to the world. But it was his grandson, Thutmose III, who truly earned his reputation as Egypt's greatest military leader. Taking the throne after Hatshepsut's death, he conducted an astonishing 17 campaigns over 20 years, systematically subduing territories from Sudan to Music Syria. His most celebrated victory came at Megiddo, where he faced a coalition of Canaanite princes. When his generals advised taking the safe route around the city, Thutmose boldly declared, "I shall go on this road of Megiddo. If you really love me, follow me." Leading his forces through a narrow pass, he caught the enemy by surprise, scattering their forces and securing a crucial foothold in the Levant. The siege of Megiddo that followed lasted 7 months, ending with the submission of numerous city-states. The Egyptian military machine became increasingly sophisticated under these warrior pharaohs. Beyond the use of chariots, they employed specialized divisions of archers, infantry, and scouts. Amenhotep II Thutmose, the third son, boasted of his own martial prowess, claiming he could shoot arrows through copper targets while driving a chariot at full speed. Whether true or exaggerated, such tales reinforced the image of the pharaoh as an invincible warrior king. Perhaps most remarkable was the administrative infrastructure that supported imperial dominion. Egypt established garrison towns throughout its conquered territories, each with military commanders, tax collectors, and diplomatic representatives. Local rulers who submitted to Egyptian authority were allowed to maintain their possessions provided they sent their heirs to Egypt for education, a thinly disguised form of hostage-taking that ensured compliance. This system of indirect rule allowed Egypt to control vast territories with minimal music manpower. The records of these triumphs were meticulously documented. On the walls of Karnak Temple, Thutmose III commissioned the annals, detailed accounts of his campaigns, including precise inventories of plunder, 924 in chariots, 241 horses, 253 foreign nobles captured, and enormous quantities of gold and silver. These weren't mere boasts, but served as powerful propaganda tools, demonstrating the divine mandate of the pharaoh to maintain cosmic order through military supremacy. This imperial success story transformed Egyptian society itself. Foreign goods became status symbols among the elite, with Minoan-inspired fresco adorning palaces, Levantine jewelry appearing in noble tombs, and exotic foods gracing royal tables. Canaanite gods like Baal and Astarte were incorporated into Egyptian religious practices. Even the Egyptian language absorbed hundreds of loan words from its subject peoples, particularly military and trade terminology. The empire also created a new class of officials with international experience and multilingual skills. Royal messengers traveled between courts carrying diplomatic correspondence, while spies disguised as merchants gathered intelligence on potential threats. The famous Amarna letters, diplomatic correspondence, written in Adian cuneiform form, reveal a sophisticated network of relationships between Egypt and other great powers, including the Hittites, Mitanni, Assyrians, and the reign of Hatshepsut, Babylonians. Among those pharaohs who expanded Egyptian monuments, one stands apart not for military triumphs, but for shattering ancient gender barriers. When Thutmose II died, unexpectedly around 1479 BCE, no one could have predicted that his widow would transform from queen regent to Egypt's most successful female pharaoh, a ruler whose legacy would be so threatening that future kings would attempt to chisel her very existence from history. Hatshepsut began her reign conventionally enough, serving as regent for her young stepson Thutmose III. But within a few years, she had taken an unprecedented step, declaring herself king of Upper and Lower Egypt. This wasn't merely a change in title. Hatshepsut systematically rewrote the rules of Egyptian kingship, commissioning statues that showed her in the traditional male regalia, complete with the false beard worn by pharaohs, while maintaining her identity as a woman. In some depictions, she appears with a masculine physique, and others her feminine features remain visible beneath royal symbols of power. Rather than displacing Thutmose III entirely, she maintained him as go-ruler while gradually claiming the primary royal authority. She secured the crucial support of high officials, particularly Senmut, who rose from humble origins to become her chief architect and possibly her closest confidant. Her power base extended to the influential priesthood of Amun, whose temples she expanded generously, ensuring divine endorsement of her unconventional music rule. Hepsit's reign stands out for prioritizing economic prosperity over military expansion, while her male predecessors and successors measured greatness in battlefield victories. She focused on rebuilding Egypt's trading networks. Her most famous diplomatic achievement was the expedition to the land of Punt, immortalized in detailed reliefs at her mortuary temple. These carvings show Egyptian ships laden with myrrh trees, frankincense, gold, ivory, and exotic animals, including baboons and leopards. The Punt expedition wasn't just a commercial success. It was a masterpiece of political theater, displaying Egypt's reach and Hatshepsut's ability to acquire exotic luxury goods without warfare. Architecturally, Hatshepsut transformed Egypt's landscape. Her crowning achievement, the mortuary temple at Deir al-Bahri, represents one of ancient Egypt's most innovative designs. Built into the cliffs opposite Thebes, its elegant terrace structure, with colonnaded facades, creates a perfect harmony between architectural precision and natural landscape. The temple served multiple purposes: a monument to her reign, a venue for her mortuary cult, and powerful propaganda demonstrating her legitimacy as pharaoh. To solidify her claim to the throne, Hepset employed theology with remarkable sophistication. She commissioned reliefs depicting her divine conception. The god Amun had taken the form of her father Thutmose I and visited her mother, making Hatshepsut not just royally born, but divinely conceived. This origin story elevated her claim above mere human politics to the realm of cosmic inevitability. She also emphasized her role in maintaining Mahat, the fundamental cosmic order, by restoring monuments, reopening trade routes, and celebrating religious festivals with unprecedented magnificence. For approximately 22 years, Hatshepsut ruled a peaceful and prosperous Egypt. Yet after her death, her successor, Thutmose III, now ruling alone, began a systematic campaign to remove her from official history. Her name and image were chiseled from monuments, her statues toppled and broken, her achievements reassigned to male pharaohs. This attempted erasure wasn't merely personal revenge. It represented an effort to restore the exclusive male nature of Egyptian kingship that Hepsid had so effectively challenged. The Egyptian history, Akhenaten, and the Amarna period features few true revolutionaries. But the pharaoh who would come to be known as Akhenaten took a radical approach that would create such profound shockwaves that Egyptians would later do everything possible to pretend it never happened. While earlier pharaohs like Hatshepsut challenged tradition within existing frameworks, Amenhotep IV shattered Egypt's foundational religious system, music, entirely. Born around 1380 BCE, Amenhotep IV initially ruled conventionally, but in his fifth regal year, he underwent a spiritual transformation that would alter Egyptian society dramatically. The traditional pantheon of gods, Amun, Ra, Osiris, Isis, and hundreds more, suddenly became secondary to a single deity, the Aten, represented as a sun disk with rays ending in hands. This wasn't merely elevating one god above others. It was effectively cancelling the worship of all other deities. To cement this religious revolution, Amenhotep IV changed his birth name to Akhenaten, meaning effective spirit of the Aten, signaling a complete break with tradition. More dramatically, he abandoned the ancient capital of Thebes, with its massive Amun temples, and established an entirely new city in the desert named Akhenaten, horizon of the Aton. This planned metropolis, modern-day Amarna, rose within just a few years, featuring open-air temples where the sun's rays could directly touch altars, palaces with no roofs, and broad avenues aligned with the sun's path. The revolution extended beyond religion into art and culture. Egyptian artistic conventions that had remained largely unchanged for over 1,000 years were suddenly replaced with a style so distinctive archaeologists immediately recognize Amarna art. Royal figures, particularly Akhenaten himself, appeared with elongated skulls, feminine hips, thick lips, and spindly limbs. More remarkably, the pharaoh was depicted in intimate family scenes, kissing his children, dining with his wife, or simply relaxing, humanizing the god-king in unprecedented ways. Queen Nefertiti, whose name means "the beautiful one has come," wasn't merely a consort, but a co-ruler who appeared in scenes traditionally reserved for kings. Her famous limestone bust, discovered in 1912, reveals both her legendary beauty and her political significance. In temple reliefs, she's shown wearing the crown of Pharaoh and smiting enemies, activities previously restricted to male rulers. Some scholars believe that after Akhenaten's death, Nefertiti may have ruled briefly as pharaoh under the name Neferuten or Spenkere. While the religious revolution consumed Akhenaten's attention, Egypt's vast empire began crumbling at the edges. Letters discovered at Amarna reveal increasingly desperate pleas from vassal kings, begging for Egyptian military support against encroaching enemies. The Hittites expanded their influence in Syria, while local rebellions threatened Egyptian control in Canaan. Akhenaten's response was minimal. He appeared more concerned with perfecting religious rituals than maintaining international power. Within the borders of Egypt itself, the changes proved deeply unpopular. The priesthood of Amun, once the wealthiest and most powerful religious institution in the land, was effectively disbanded. Their temples were closed, their names chiseled from monuments, and their vast economic holdings redirected to art and worship. Ordinary Egyptians found themselves cut off from familiar gods who had governed every aspect of daily life for millennia. While Akhenaten's name was being systematically erased from Tutankhamun and the restoration history, his successor, Res would eventually become one of the most recognized in all of archaeology, yet not for any great achievement during his lifetime. The paradox of Tutankhamun lies in how his unremarkable reign produced history's most remarkable archaeological discovery. In the aftermath of Akhenaten's religious revolution, Egypt found itself with a child king, a boy of merely 9 years old. Tutan inherited not just a throne, but a kingdom in spiritual crisis. The court officials who truly held power, particularly the elderly advisor Ai and the military commander Horm, recognized the urgent need to restore Egypt's traditional religious order. These men had weathered Akhenaten's revolution, watching as Egypt's financial standing diminished and its internal cohesion fractured. Now, with the malleable young ruler as their figurehead, they swiftly began undoing the damage. The most significant policy document of Tutankhamun's reign was the Restoration Stela, a proclamation that painted a grim picture of Egypt under Atenism. The temples and the cities of the gods and goddesses were fallen into decay, and their shrines were fallen into ruin, having become mere mounds of rubble with weeds growing. The stela represented more than administrative reform. It was a theological correction, justifying the return to orthodoxy by describing the god's abandonment of Egypt during Akhenaten's heresy. Behind this royal decree stood Tutan's vizier and likely grandfather or great-uncle. I had survived the Amarna period by adapting to Akhenaten's religious demands while maintaining traditional connections. Now, with a child king under his guidance, I orchestrated Egypt's religious revival. Alongside him, General Hormhem managed military affairs, working to rebuild Egypt's neglected international relations and defensive capabilities. The young king became the perfect vessel for religious restoration. Buildings the Kara Temple show Tutan making offerings to Amun-Ra and other traditional deities. Skilled craftsmen were recalled to repair damaged statues of the gods. Tutankhamun's carts appear on restored monuments throughout Egypt, symbolically reclaiming them for orthodox religion. Far from mere religious posturing, these acts represented a desperate bid to restore cosmic order to a kingdom believed to have fallen into chaos under Akhenaten. Despite these efforts, Tutankhamun's actual control over state affairs remained limited throughout his short life. DNA analysis of his mummy confirms he suffered from multiple physical ailments, including a club foot that required him to use walking sticks, as confirmed by the dozens found in his tomb. Analysis also revealed evidence of malaria infections that may have weakened his already fragile constitution. These health challenges, possibly resulting from the royal family's practice of consanguineous marriages, limited his personal impact on music governance. When Tutankhamun died unexpectedly, around age 18 or 19, he left no heir to the throne. His young widow Senamun was placed in a precarious position. Archaeological evidence suggests she may have written desperate letters to the Hittite king, requesting one of his sons as a husband. A remarkable diplomatic gamble that ultimately failed. Instead, the elderly Ai assumed the throne, marrying Akhenaten to legitimize his claim before Horm eventually succeeded him. These military men would complete the eraser of the Amarna period from official history. Had history unfolded differently, Tutankhamun might have remained a forgotten transitional figure. However, in 1922, Howard Carter's discovery of his nearly intact tomb in the Valley of the Kings transformed this minor king into Akhenaten's greatest celebrity. The spectacular airy artifacts, including the solid gold mask that has become the very symbol of ancient Egypt, revealed the incredible artistry of the period. The 5,398 catalogued items from his burial chamber provide our most comprehensive window into royal funeral practices of the New Kingdom. Music. Ramses the Great. After Egypt's religious restoration under Tutankhamun, the empire needed something more than just a return to tradition. It needed a ruler whose legacy would be carved not just in stone, but in the very consciousness of civilization. While many pharaohs claimed divine status, only one would successfully blur the line between man and God so effectively that 3,000 years later we still know him simply as the Great. Born into the 19th dynasty around 1303 BCE, Ramses the I ascended to the throne in his early 20s, following the brief reign of his father Seti I. What followed was an unprecedented 60-year period of rule that would transform Egypt's landscape, both physically and culturally. By the time of his death at the remarkable age of 90, Ramses had fathered over 100 children, with his numerous wives and concubines, effectively creating his own dynasty within a dynasty. The scale of Ramses' architectural ambitions remains almost incomprehensible. While previous pharaohs built impressive monuments, Ramses built on a scale that bordered on the obsessive. The temples at Abu Simbel stand as perhaps his most extraordinary achievement. Massive structures carved directly into sandstone cliffs overlooking the Nile. The main temple's entrance is flanked by 4 colossal seated figures of Ramses himself, each reaching 66 feet in height. Most ingeniously, the temple was designed with perfect astronomical alignment, so that twice a year on February 22nd and October 22nd and October 22nd, the rising sun penetrates the entire length of the temple to illuminate statues of Ramses and the gods Amun and Ra, leaving only the god of the underworld, ruled pat symbolically in darkness. Beyond Abu Simbel, Ramses expanded or constructed over a dozen major temples, countless statues, and entire cities. His mortuary temple, the Ramesseum, contained a seated colossus weighing over 1,000 tons, a feat of engineering that would challenge modern construction capabilities. At Karnak and Luxor, massive columns and courtyards bore his name, while his new capital, Pi-Ramses in the Delta, became one of the largest cities in the ancient world, described in texts as sparkling like the horizon of music heaven. While remembered primarily as a builder, Ramses established his military reputation early. In the 5th year of his reign, he led an ambitious campaign against the Hittite Empire at Kadesh in modern Syria. Though nearly ending in disaster when he was separated from most of his army, Ramses claimed a miraculous victory, allegedly fighting off thousands of enemies single-handedly until reinforcements arrived. The battle reality was likely closer to a stalemate, but Ramses' propaganda machine transformed it into Egypt's greatest triumph, depicted on temple walls throughout the kingdom with increasingly elaborate embellishments. Music. This campaign eventually led to the world's first recorded peace treaty in 1258 BCE, inscribed in both hieroglyphics and Hittite cuneiform. The agreement established boundaries, military alliance, and even extradition policies between the two superpowers. The treaty proved so historically significant that a replica now hangs at the United Nations headquarters in New York as a symbol of ancient diplomacy. Ramses' favorite queen, the beautiful Nefertari, received unprecedented honors during her lifetime and after her death. Her tomb in the Valley of the Queens contains some of the most exquisite paintings ever created in ancient Egypt, with vibrant colors still visible after more than 3 millennia. When she died, Ramses commissioned a massive temple at Abu Simbel, specially dedicated to her and the goddess Hathor. Music. Perhaps most telling of Ramses' character was his penchant for appropriating existing monuments. Throughout Egypt, older statues and buildings were inscribed with his Khatu, sometimes replacing the names of previous kings. This wasn't mere vanity. It was a calculated program to ensure his immortality through omnipresence. In effect, he was rewriting history to position himself at the center of Egypt's narrative, and music, the immortality Ramses sought through stone, proved remarkably successful. We, decline of the New Kingdom, still know his name today. Yet, the empire he strengthened began unraveling almost immediately after his death. Though Ramses had positioned himself as the center of Egypt's narrative, the chapters that followed revealed how quickly even the mightiest legacies can fade. The succession problems began immediately. Ramses' 13th son, MPA, was already in his 60s when he took the throne. Though he successfully repelled Libyan invasions and Sea People's incursions, recording these victories on the famous Israel Stela, which contains the earliest known written reference to Israel, his reign marked the beginning of Egypt's slow decline. The power vacuum intensified after his death, leading to a period of succession disputes and short-lived reigns. The dynasty that followed, the 20th, attempted to recapture past glory, with multiple rulers adopting the name Ramses in hopes of invoking the power of their legendary predecessor. This parade of Ramses imitators, from Ramses the Free through Ramses X11, represented increasingly desperate attempts to maintain the appearance of Egypt's former grandeur. While its actual influence waned, this naming convention reveals much about ancient Egyptian thinking. Names carried power, a kof-or, and by adopting the name of history's most successful pharaoh, these rulers hoped to channel his strength. When the mysterious Sea Peoples, a confederation of naval raiders from various Mediterranean regions, swept through the eastern Mediterranean around 175 BCE, destroying the Hittite Empire and several other civilizations. Ramses III managed what few others could. He defeated them. The battle scenes recorded at his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu show Egyptian archers firing into enemy ships, while the Pharaoh's navy boxed in the invaders. The accompanying text boasts, "Those who reached my frontier, their seed is not. Their heart and soul are finished forever and ever." Yet, this victory proved Pyrrhic. The tremendous military expenditure drained Egypt's resources, and the civilization never fully recovered its international standing. Economic troubles followed, including the first recorded labor strike in history, when royal tomb workers at Deir el-Medina walked off their jobs after payments of grain rations fell months behind. Music, Ramses III's end proved as troubled as his reign. In what is now known as the Herma conspiracy, a group of royal wives, officials, and priests plotted to assassinate the king and place a minor prince on the throne. Modern CT scans of Ramses III's mummy revealed a fatal throat wound, likely from a knife, confirming what the ancient judicial papyri had long suggested. The conspiracy succeeded in killing the Pharaoh, though the plotters were caught and executed. The pharaohs who followed faced mounting troubles on all fronts. Tomb robberies became endemic, with thieves systematically looting the Valley of the Kings, crime that would have been unthinkable in earlier periods. The tomb robbery papyri detail investigation and trials of thieves who confessed under torture to desecrating royal burials for their treasures. Even Ramses High Isaac's tomb was not spared, with investigators finding all the sepulchres of the royal children which are in this place broken into. Music power increasingly devolved to regional authorities as central control weakened. The high priests of Amun at Karnak began to function almost as independent rulers, controlling vast temple estates and eventually adopting royal regalia. The most prominent Heror went so far as to place his name in royal courtiers, effectively declaring himself king of southern Egypt, while the last Ramesside kings maintained nominal control from Pi-Ramses in the Buyuzic north. By the end of Ramses XI's reign, around 1069 BCET, Egypt had fundamentally transformed. The unified new kingdom that once commanded respect across the known world had fractured. Foreign influences penetrated deeper into Egyptian society, and the country entered the third intermediate period, the time when Libyan military commanders would establish their own dynasties, and eventually Nubian kings would conquer Egypt from the south, turning former vassals into overlords. Music, third intermediate period. The mighty empire that once spanned from Syria to Sudan now resembled a complex patchwork quilt of competing powers, where priests could wield more authority than pharaohs and foreign generals claimed. Divine Egyptian kingship. this wasn't just political fragmentation. It was the complete inversion of everything that made Egypt Egypt for over 1,000 years. Around 1069 BCE, as the final pharaoh of the new kingdom relinquished control, Egypt entered a period of profound transformation. The nation split into functional regions with competing centers of power. In the north, a new capital emerged at Tanis in the Nile Delta, where pharaohs of the 21st dynasty named the trappings of royal authority, but controlled only a fraction of Egypt's former territory. Meanwhile, in Thebes, the high priests of Amunyu established what amounted to a religious state, commanding their own military forces and governing the southern region with near complete autonomy. The unusual power-sharing arrangement marked a dramatic reversal in Egyptian governance. The high priests controlled the vast temple estates and treasury of Amun, giving them economic leverage that rivaled or exceeded the northern pharaohs. These priest-kings instituted their own dating systems, conducted independent foreign policy, and even adopted royal titles, all while maintaining the fiction of loyalty to the distant Tanite music kings. What made this period particularly remarkable was the shift in how power was conceived. Traditional pharaonic authority had always been rooted in divine kingship and centralized control. Now Egypt operated more like a confederation of allied states than a unified kingdom. The concept of dual authority, religious and secular, represented a fundamental break with Egypt's past political ideology. Archaeological evidence revealed that despite this political fragmentation, Egyptian culture remained vibrant, adapting to new realities rather than disappearing. The royal necropolis at Tanis yielded extraordinary finds, including the tomb of Pharaoh Susanisi, a 21st dynasty ruler. Unlike the familiar golden splendor of Tutankhamun's burial, Susinis was interred in an exquisite silver sarcophagus, a metal more precious than gold in ancient Egypt, due to its rarity. When Pierre Montet discovered this tomb in 1939, the world barely noticed, preoccupied with the outbreak of World War II. The most profound transformation came when Libyan military commanders, descendants of mercenaries who had settled in Egypt generations earlier, seized power and established the 22nd dynasty around 9595 BCE. Shashank I, the dynasty's founder, managed to temporarily reunify Egypt under his command. His military campaigns extended beyond Egypt's borders, including an invasion of Judah and Israel, recorded not just in Egyptian texts, but also in the Hebrew Bible as the sacking of Jerusalem by Shishak, king of Egypt. These Libyan pharaohs maintained Egyptian cultural traditions while introducing new practices. They distributed power through a system of appointing family members to key military and religious positions, effectively creating a network of loyal vassals rather than relying on traditional bureaucracy. This pragmatic approach to governance allowed for regional autonomy while maintaining central control. By the 8th century BCE, this system had begun to unravel. The 22nd dynasty fractured with rival Libyan families, establishing the competing 23rd dynasty. At times, Egypt had multiple pharaohs ruling simultaneously in different regions, each claiming legitimacy. Political marriages cemented temporary alliances, while betrayals and power shifts became commonplace. Royal succession followed no clear pattern, with brothers, sons, and even generals from outside the royal family claiming the throne. Throughout this political turmoil, everyday Egyptian life continued. Local economies focused on regional trade networks rather than the grand international commerce of the new kingdom. Artistic traditions evolved with distinct regional styles emerging in sculpture, architecture, and oratory practices. Religion remained a constant, with temple rituals continuing uninterrupted despite the changing political landscape. As temple rituals continued, Nubian, Kushite, pharaohs uninterrupted during Egypt's political chaos, a powerful force was gathering strength far to the south. Beyond the First Cataract, beyond even the Second, the ancient kingdom of Kush was preparing to rewrite Egyptian history in the most unexpected way imaginable. Around 745 BCE, while Egypt's regional powers squabbled amongst themselves, Kushite warriors crossed the border not as simple invaders, but as self-proclaimed saviors of a civilization they deeply revered. The Kushite rulers of the 25th dynasty viewed their intervention not as a foreign conquest, but as a divine mission. Kinpa, also called Payankai, the dynasty's founder marched north with an army infused with religious purpose. His famous victory, Stela discovered, at Napata, reveals his motivations went beyond mere territorial ambition. When confronting Egyptian nobles, he expressed horror at their ritual impurity. They had entered his presence without proper purification, and worse, had neglected the sacred temples under their stewardship. "How can you stand in the house of Horus with unclean bodies?" Pa reportedly demanded of the Egyptian princes who surrendered to him. Unlike previous conquerors who looted Egypt's treasures, Pate insisted on maintaining ritual purity throughout his campaign. Before entering Memphis, he purified himself with water from the sacred lake and made offerings to the gods, demonstrating his commitment to Egyptian religious music traditions. The Kushite kings had absorbed Egyptian culture for centuries. Their administration used hieroglyphic writing. They built pyramids, though smaller and steeper than Egypt's classic monuments, and they worshipped Egyptian deities. Their royal burial grounds of El Aru and Nuri reveal a profound commitment to Egyptianary practices, modified with distinct Nubian elements. When they conquered Egypt, they didn't need to learn its culture. They were already practicing it. Peel's son Shabaka consolidated Kushite control and moved the administrative center to Thebes. He demonstrated his commitment to Egyptian traditions by collecting and preserving ancient religious texts. The famous Shabaka stone contained what he claimed was a copy of a worm-eaten papyrus from antiquity, preserving creation myths attributed to the mighty priests of the earliest music dynasties. The most celebrated Kushite pharaoh, Tuhaqa, ruled during Egypt's brief resurgence as a regional power. His reign was marked by ambitious building projects throughout Egypt and Nubia. At Karnak, he constructed a magnificent colonnade with massive columns topped with papyrus capitals. At Kawa and Nubia, he built temples rivaling those in Egypt proper. Dahara's monuments featured distinctive Kushite artistic elements, royal figures with muscular bodies, broad shoulders, and strong facial features that departed from traditional Egyptian royal music portraiture. The Kushite pharaohs revitalized Egyptian architecture on a scale not seen since Ramses' decay. Archaeological evidence shows they restored neglected temples, reconstructed damaged monuments, and revived artistic workshops. Their building program wasn't merely aesthetic. It was a political statement about their legitimacy and their role as custodians of Egyptian tradition. This Nubian dynasty's rule was challenged by the rising Assyrian Empire under kings Esarhaddon and Ashur-banipal. Assyrian records describe campaigns against Kush and Egypt as if they were a single entity. In 671 BCE, Esarhaddon's forces sacked Memphis and drove Taharqa south. Though the Kushites temporarily recaptured Lower Egypt, subsequent Assyrian campaigns eventually forced them to retreat to their Nubian homeland. The importance of the 25th dynasty extends beyond their brief control of Egypt. Their reverence for Egypt's traditions helped preserve religious texts and artistic practices that might otherwise have been lost. Their rule represents a unique phenomenon in world history, conquered people being ruled by those who saw themselves as the true preservers of the conquered music culture. The Kushite preservation of Egyptian culture would face its greatest Assyrian invasions, test not from within, but from a ruthless military machine whose reputation spread terror across the ancient world. The Assyrian Empire, with its iron weapons, sophisticated siege engines, and brutal warfare tactics, had been expanding westward through the Near East with devastating efficiency. By the mid-7th century BCE, their sights turned toward the wealth of Egypt, setting the stage for a clash between ancient tradition and military innovation. The Assyrian king Shohaddon's campaign in 671 BCE marked the beginning of a new era in Egyptian history. Unlike previous invaders who sought to adopt Egyptian culture, the Assyrians came with overwhelming force and cold pragmatism. Their army moved with precision through the Delta region, deploying tactics that Egyptian forces had never encountered. The Assyrians were masters of terror. They routinely impaled captives, flayed enemies alive, and created pyramids of severed heads to break resistance before battles even began. When Tahara retreated southward, following Memphis's fall, the Assyrians implemented a calculated strategy to maintain control. They divided northern Egypt into small administrative units, each overseen by local rulers willing to pledge loyalty to Assyria. This fragmentation strategy prevented unified resistance, while allowing the Assyrians to extract maximum wealth through tribute and taxes. The Assyrian grip on Egypt proved difficult to maintain from afar. When Esarhaddon died in 69 BCE, Tahara seized the opportunity to reclaim Memphis. This prompted a massive response from the new Assyrian king, Ashurbanipal, who dispatched an army that again drove Taharqa southward. Ashurbanipal's inscriptions clay that his forces trampled Egypt underfoot like a bull stands upon grass, illustrating both the violence of the conquest and the Assyrian flair for intimidating propaganda. The ultimate humiliation came in 663 BCE when Ashurbanipal's forces pursued Taharqa's successor, Tentmani, all the way to Thebes. The sacred city, which had stood for millennia as Egypt's religious heart, was subjected to a devastating sack. An Assyrian account reveals their perspective. That city, the whole of it, I conquered with the help of Ashura and Ishtar. Silver, gold, precious stones, all the wealth of the palace, I removed from it and counted as spoil. Looting of Thebes didn't just remove wealth, it struck at the very foundation of Egyptian spiritual identity. The Kushite dynasty's power in Egypt effectively ended with this catastrophic defeat, forcing them to retreat permanently to their Nubian homeland. In the aftermath, Ashurbanipal installed Sumaikai as ruler in CE. Though initially a loyal Assyrian vassal, Sumtuk would eventually capitalize on Assyria's growing problems elsewhere to reassert Egyptian independence. His diplomatic marriages, strategic alliances with mercenary forces, particularly Greek soldiers, and patient political maneuvering allowed him to gradually reunify Egypt and established the 26th dynasty, the last significant native Egyptian royal music house. The Assyrian period left lasting imprints on Egyptian society. Their bureaucratic practices influenced Egyptian administrative systems. Scribes began incorporating elements of Mesopotamian record-keeping. Egyptian art from this period shows subtle Assyrian influences and royal imagery and battle scenes. The military was permanently transformed with the incorporation of foreign mercenaries, particularly Greeks and Kurans, who would remain a fixture in Egyptian armies. Archaeological evidence from Thebes tells a more nuanced story than Assyrian accounts suggest. Though damaged, many temples continued functioning, and rebuilding began relatively quickly. The resilience of Egyptian institutions allowed for cultural continuity even after such a traumatic event. However, the psychological impact remained profound. No longer could Egyptians believe their land was divinely protected from the late period conquest. From the ashes of foreign domination emerged an Egypt determined to reclaim its identity through a fascinating contradiction. Embracing innovation while obsessively recreating its ancient past, the ruins of Thebes would give way to something unexpected, a cultural rebirth that borrowed equally from Egypt's golden age in the new international world order. Sekai, once an Assyrian puppet, transformed himself into Egypt's savior. After securing control of the Delta region around 64 BCE CE, he gradually expanded southward, ultimately reunifying the fractured nation. His masterstroke came through diplomacy rather than conquest. He sent his daughter, Neterist, to Thebes, where she was adopted by the powerful divine adoratries of Amun, effectively merging the northern royal line with the southern religious authority. The 26th dynasty rulers engineered what historians call the Saint Renaissance, named after their capital at Sais. This wasn't merely political restoration, but a deliberate cultural revival. Palace artisans studied thousand-year-old tomb reliefs, copying their styles with remarkable precision. Scribes painstakingly recovered ancient texts and religious formulas. New temple architecture mimicked old kingdom proportions and layouts, creating an illusion of timeless continuity, even as the world around Egypt transformed. This cultural nostalgia wasn't merely aesthetic, it was strategic. By positioning themselves as the legitimate heirs to Egypt's golden age, the seed pharaohs strengthened their claim to rule a nation traumatized by centuries of foreign domination. They created what scholars call a resurrection environment, where temples became time capsules, preserving ancient traditions against the uncertain future. Yet paradoxically, this was also Egypt's most internationally connected era. Greek mercenaries and traders established permanent settlements, especially at Natras in the western delta, granted special status by Pharaoh Ahmose II around 5 Pharaoh Ahmose II around 570 BCE CE. This first authorized Greek colony became a bustling commercial hub where Mediterranean merchants exchanged olive oil and wine for Egyptian grain and papyrus. Archaeological excavations have unearthed thousands of Greek pottery fragments alongside Egyptian artifacts, revealing vibrant cultural exchange. Music. The 26 dynasties military relied heavily on these foreign soldiers, particularly the fearsome bronzemen, as the Egyptians called the Greeks. They received land grants, established families, and gradually integrated into Egyptian society. Some even adopted Egyptian religious practices, dedicating statues and stellin, a fascinating hybrid artistic style that combined Greek proportions with Egyptian iconography. Despite this renaissance, Egypt's geopolitical position remained precarious. When the Neo-Babylonian Empire, under Nebuchadnezzar, geopolitical position, defeated the Takit Assyrians, Egypt briefly expanded its influence into the Levant. Pharaoh Necho II even launched ambitious projects, including an attempt to connect the Nile to the Red Sea with a canal system, a remarkable engineering feat that would only be completed centuries later. The emergence of the Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great dramatically altered the balance of power. Pharaoh Ahmose II navigated these dangerous waters with remarkable diplomatic skill, forming alliances with Greek city-states and Lydian King Croesus to counter Persian expansion. His foreign policy kept Egypt prosperous and independent for over 4 decades, but the inevitable confrontation merely awaited his big successor. In 25 BCE, Persian king Cambyses II invaded Egypt, defeating Pharaoh Psamtik II. In Cambyses II invaded Egypt, defeating Pharaoh Psamtik II. Egyptian sources claim Cambyses employed psychological warfare, placing cats, sacred animals to Egyptians, in front of his army, knowing Egyptian soldiers would hesitate to fire arrows for fear of harming the revered creatures. While likely exaggerated, this story reflects the cultural clash between Egyptian religious sensibilities and foreign pragmatism. Music. The Persian conquest established the 27th dynasty, the first entirely foreign ruling house. Though Egyptian administration largely continued under Persian oversight, the symbolic wound was profound. Native resistance periodically flared up with the 28th through 30th dynasties, representing brief periods of independence between Persian reconquests. Each restoration became shorter than the last. The final native pharaoh Nekton Nebo II fled to Nubia in 340 BCE, as Persian forces retook Egypt for the Akhenaten. The collision of empires unfolded. Persian rule in Egypt dramatically on Egyptian soil in 25 BCE CE, when Cambyses II led the Assyria-Amenmeted Persian forces against Pharaohs at the Battle of Cleisium. The battle itself became legendary not just for its outcome, but for Cambyses' ingenious psychological warfare. Knowing the Egyptians considered cat sacred, Persian soldiers reportedly carried felines into battle or painted their images on shields. Egyptian archers, reluctant to risk harming these divine creatures, held their fire, giving the Persians a critical advantage that helped secure their victory. Upon conquering Cambyses didn't simply impose Persian customs. Instead, he adopted traditional Egyptian royal titles and imagery, establishing himself as a legitimate pharaoh while simultaneously serving as a Persian ruler. This pragmatic approach created the 27th dynasty, a foreign power ruling through familiar cultural frameworks. The Persians understood that controlling Egypt required more than military might. It needed cultural legitimacy that resonated with the local population. The administrative transformation under Persian rule was comprehensive. Egypt became a satrapy, integrated into the larger provincial system of the Amenid Empire. The Persians implemented a sophisticated bureaucracy with both Persian officials and Egyptian administrators working in collaboration. While Persian authority remained absolute, day-to-day governance often relied on Egyptian expertise, creating a complex power-sharing arrangement that maintained stability while extracting wealth. Persian kings demonstrated remarkable political savvy in their religious policies. Despite following Zoroastrianism personally, they participated in Egyptian religious ceremonies, made donations to temples, and commissioned art showing themselves performing traditional rituals for Chaldean deities. King Darius I even ordered the codification of Egyptian laws, positioning himself as a protector of Egyptian traditions, while simultaneously ensuring Persian dominance remained unchallenged. Yet beneath the veneer of accommodation, Persian rule brought unprecedented taxation and resource extraction. The Egyptians faced heavy financial burdens as Persian authorities demanded regular tribute in gold, grain, and other commodities. This exploitation, combined with the psychological weight of foreign rule, sparked numerous rebellions throughout the First Persian period. The revolt led by Inaros II in the 1460s BCE proved particularly significant, temporarily reclaiming parts of Egypt before being crushed by Persian forces. The Egyptian dream of independence finally materialized in 404 BCE when, taking advantage of internal struggles within the Persian Empire, native leaders established the 28th through 30th dynasties. This brief renaissance of local rule lasted 60 years, with pharaohs like Nectanebo I investing heavily in temple construction and cultural revival. They sought to erase the memory of Persian domination while strengthening Egypt's defenses against the inevitable return of foreign powers. The Second Persian Conquest in 343 BCE under Artaxerxes III revealed the empire's diminishing patience with Egyptian resistance. Unlike the more accommodating approach of earlier Persian rule, this occupation brought harsh repression. Persian forces systematically looted temples, imposed crippling financial penalties, dismantled defensive fortifications, and executed resistance leaders. The Egyptian priesthood, once courted by Persian rulers, now faced direct attacks on their authority and resources, deepening Egyptian resentment. Persian authority faltered just 8 years later, when Alexander the Great's Macedonian army swept through the Persian Empire. When he reached Egypt in 332 BCE, Alexander encountered little resistance. Instead, many Egyptians welcomed him as a liberator from Persian oppression. The priests at the Siwa Oasis Oracle declared Alexander a son of Amunun, granting him divine legitimacy that even the Persians had never fully achieved. This religious endorsement transformed Alexander from conqueror to divinely sanctioned ruler in Egyptian Alexander the Great and the Macedonian conquest. Alexander's divine endorsement from Egyptian priests marked just the beginning of his transformation of Egypt. What happens when a military genius who conquered half the known double order decides to build a city bearing his name on Egyptian soil? A city destined to eclipse all others in the ancient Mediterranean. Alexander's vision for Egypt went far beyond mere conquest. In 331 BCE, after his divine coronation at Memphis as pharaoh, he made a monumental decision that would shape the Mediterranean world for millennia. He ordered the foundation of Alexandria on a strategic strip of land between Lake Mareotis and the Mediterranean Sea, a location carefully chosen for its natural harbor and defensive advantages. The legendary architect Dinocrates of Rhodes designed the city following a Hellenistic grid pattern with wide boulevards and distinct quarters for different ethnic groups. Alexandria quickly became Alexander's crown jewel in Egypt, a visible manifestation of his policy of cultural fusion. The city featured distinct Greek, Egyptian, and Jewish quarters, creating one of history's first truly multicultural metropolises. This wasn't merely a practical arrangement. It reflected Alexander's broader philosophy of unifying Eastern and Western traditions, what historians now call his policy of homoia, concord, or unity. While embracing his role as a traditional pharaoh, Alexander simultaneously instituted administrative forms that blended Macedonian efficiency with Egyptian bureaucratic traditions. He appointed the Greek Cleomenes of Nardus as financial administrators, while maintaining Egyptian officials in local positions, a sophisticated balancing act that prevented the kind of cultural friction that had undermined Persian rule. Alexander understood that effective governance required both cultural sensitivity and pragmatic organization. Unlike previous conquerors, Alexander demonstrated extraordinary religious tolerance. He participated in Egyptian ceremonies at Memphis and made offerings at temples throughout Egypt. His political genius showed in his ability to appear authentically Egyptian to Egyptians while remaining Macedonian to his armies. When portrayed in Egyptian contexts, he adopted traditional pharaonic regalia. When addressing his troops, he maintained his Macedonian identity. This cultural code switching proved remarkably effective at consolidating his authority among diverse populations. Music. After establishing Alexandria and setting Egypt's administration in motion, Alexandria departed in the spring of 331 BCE to continue his campaign against Persia. He would never return to Egypt. Over the next 8 years, his conquests stretched to the borders of India, creating one of history's largest empires. When fever claimed his life in Babylon in June 323 BCE, his empire faced immediate succession crisis. His generals, the Diadochi or successors, began fighting for control of different music regions. The Battle of Egypt was particularly significant. Ptolemy, one of Alexander's most trusted generals and childhood friend, outmaneuvered his rivals through a bold act. He hijacked Alexander's funeral cortege, which was traveling to Macedonia, and brought the conqueror's embalmed body to Egypt. By controlling Alexander's remains, Ptolemy legitimized his claim to Egypt and declared himself governor. By 305 BCE, he had proclaimed himself King Ptolemy I Soter, founding the Ptolemaic dynasty that would rule for nearly 3 centuries. Under Ptolemy's descendants, Alexandria flourished as the intellectual and commercial center of the Hellenistic world. The city's crowning achievements included the Lighthouse of Pharaohs, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and the Great Library of Alexandria, which housed hundreds of thousands of scrolls in its quest to collect all the world's knowledge. The tools also established the Museum, history's first research institute, which attracted scholars like Euclid, Archimedes, and the Ptolemaic dynasty. Osiris. The magnificent monuments of Alexandria tell only half the story of Ptolemaic Egypt. Beneath the veneer of cultural achievement lay a royal family whose bloodline grew increasingly tangled with each generation. Greek monarchs who adopted Egyptian customs in public while plotting against each other in private, creating palace intrigues that would make even modern soap operas seem tame by comparison. When Ptolemy formally crowned himself pharaoh in 305 BCE, he established more than just another dynasty. He created a hybrid cultural system that would dominate the Mediterranean for centuries. The tools were masterful cultural chameleons, presenting themselves as legitimate pharaohs to their Egyptian subjects while maintaining their Greek identity among fellow Hellenes. They funded massive temple complexes throughout Egypt, including the spectacular Temple of Horus at Edfu and the Temple of Haor at Dendera, where traditional Egyptian religious iconography flourished, alongside subtle Greek influences and architectural details. The dynasty's most shocking practice was their adoption of sibling marriage, previously unthinkable in Greek culture, but familiar in ancient Egyptian royal tradition, beginning with Ptolemy II, who married his full sister, Arsinoe II. This practice continued for generations ostensibly to preserve the purity of royal blood. Far from strengthening the dynasty, these unions produced increasingly unstable rulers. The later Ptolemies suffered from genetic disorders and volatile temperaments, exacerbating the palace conspiracies and familial violence that became their music hallmark. Court life in Ptolemaic Alexandria operated with breathtaking brutality. Mothers plotted against sons, brothers assassinated brothers, and wives eliminated husbands with calculated precision. Ptolemy IV had his mother, Bones II, murdered. Ptolemy VII celebrated his return to power by dismembering his nephew and sending the pieces to his sister wife, Cleopatra II, as a birthday gift. These weren't aberrations, but typical of the dynasty's bloody internal music politics. Despite this dysfunction, the Ptolemies transformed Alexandria into an intellectual powerhouse unmatched in the ancient world. They expanded the Great Library's collection through aggressive acquisition tactics. Ships entering Alexandria's harbor were required to surrender any books for copying, with only the copies returned to their owners. The library attracted mathematicians like Eratosthenes, who accurately calculated Earth's circumference, and Euclid, whose elements became the foundation of geometry for 2 millennia. Poets like Callimachus and Theocritus flourished under Ptolemaic patronage, crafting new literary forms that would influence Roman authors for generations. The dynasty's stability began crumbling as Rome's shadow lengthened across the Mediterranean. The turning point came in 168 BCE when Roman diplomat Gaius Papilius Lionus famously drew a circle in the sand around Ptolemy VII, demanding he withdraw from Cyprus before stepping out of the circle. This humiliating capitulation marked Egypt's declining sovereignty. The Rosetta Stone, created during Ptolemy V's reign, provides ironic testimony to the dynasty's fading power. While celebrating the pharaoh's supposed achievements, the trilingual inscription actually documents concessions to rebellious priests and tax exemptions granted to quell unrest. This stone, later vital for deciphering hieroglyphics, reveals how much the Ptolemies struggled to maintain control over their increasingly fractious kingdom. By the dynasty's final century, Roman intervention became commonplace in Egyptian affairs. In 58 BCE, Ptolemy XII traveled to Rome to secure loans from Cassus and Pompey, mortgaging Egypt's finances to maintain his throne. His daughter, the famous Cleopatra III, would later stake everything on alliances with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony in desperate attempts to preserve Egypt's independence from Rome. Throughout their rule, the Ptolemies maintained elaborate religious pageantry, including the cult of Capus, a hybrid deity designed to appeal to both Greeks and Egyptians. In the grand processions of the Ptolemaic festival, which rivaled the Olympic Games in splendor, these cultural innovations helped maintain social cohesion in a kingdom strained by ethnic tensions, economic pressures, and increasing foreign interference. Cleopatra VII and the fall of ancient Egypt, as elaborate displays of Ptolemaic pageantry, proved insufficient against Rome's growing shadow. History would call upon a different type of ruler to navigate Egypt's final chapter. Unlike her ancestors, who used spectacle and intimidation, Cleopatra VII deployed something far more powerful, an extraordinary combination of intellectual brilliance and political cunning that nearly saved Egypt from Roman domination. Born in 69 BCE into a dynasty plagued by betrayal and violence, Cleopatra received an education that far surpassed that of her predecessors. She mastered Greek philosophy, rhetoric, and mathematics, while studying at Alexandria's intellectual centers. What truly distinguished her, however, was her linguistic talent. She spoke 9 languages fluently. This remarkable ability allowed her to communicate directly with foreign diplomats without translators and, most significantly, to speak with native Egyptians in their own tongue, something no previous toy had bothered to do in nearly 3 centuries of rule. Cleopatra's path to power was neither simple nor assured. After the death of her father, Ptolemy XII, in 51 BCE, she was forced to co-rule. With her younger brother Ptolemy XIII, their relationship deteriorated rapidly, culminating in civil war when Cleopatra was driven from Alexandria. Her return to power came through a legendary encounter with Julius Caesar, who arrived in Egypt pursuing his rival Pompey. Rather than simply pleading for Roman intervention, Cleopatra boldly smuggled herself into Caesar's quarters, wrapped in a carpet, demonstrating the theatrical flair and political daring that would become her hallmark. Caesar restored Cleopatra to her throne and fathered her son Caesarion, providing her with a powerful connection to Rome. But this was far more than a romance. It was a calculated political alliance. Cleopatra needed Roman military support to secure her rule, while Caesar gained access to Egypt's vast grain supplies and wealth. When Caesar was assassinated in 44 BCE, Cleopatra quickly aligned herself with Mark Antony, one of Rome's most powerful generals and a member of the Second Triumvirate ruling Rome. Their relationship evolved into both a political and personal partnership. In 41 BCE, Cleopatra hosted Antony in Alexandria, dazzling him with extravagant banquets that displayed Egypt's wealth. She bore him 3 children and received enormous territorial grants in return, including Cyprus, parts of Cilicia, Phoenicia, and regions of Syria. These concessions strengthened Egypt's position, but alarmed Rome, especially Octavian, Antony's rival, and Caesar's adopted son. Octavian launched a brilliant propaganda campaign against the couple, portraying Antony as a man bewitched by a foreign queen and abandoning Roman values. This characterization, the seductive Oriental temptress, corrupting the noble Roman, would persist for millennia, in Western accounts of Cleopatra obscuring her true political acumen. Archaeological evidence tells a different story. Coins bearing her image, show a strong-featured woman with a prominent nose and determined expression, not the idealized beauty depicted in later Roman art and modern films. The propagandistic strategy worked. Roman opinion turned against Antony, and in 32 BCE, Octavian convinced the Senate to declare war not against a fellow Roman but against Cleopatra. The decisive confrontation came at Actium in 31 BCE, where Octavian's naval forces, commanded by Agria, defeated the combined fleet of Antony and Cleopatra. Though they escaped the battle, their military position was music unsalvageable. Back in Alexandria, with Octavian's forces approaching the city in 30 BCE, Antony fell on his sword after receiving false news of Cleopatra's death. Cleopatra, knowing the clay braided through Rome as a captive in Octavian's triumph, chose suicide. According to Roman accounts, she arranged her poisonous asps to be smuggled to her in a basket of figs. Modern scholars debate whether snake venom or another poison was used, but the result was the same. The last pharaoh of Egypt was dead at age Roman Egypt begins. 39. The ASP that allegedly took Cleopatra's life delivered more than the death of a queen. It marked the final collapse of Egypt's 30-year civilization as an independent power. When Augustus returned to Rome in 29 BCE, he brought not just Egypt's vast wealth, but its very identity under imperial control. Unlike other conquered territories that fell under senatorial supervision, Augustus claimed this prize for himself, establishing a precedent that would continue for centuries. Egypt became the emperor's personal domain, too valuable to entrust to anyone else. The new Roman province of Egypt required special permission for senators, even to visit, with Augustus appointing a prefect from the equestrian order to govern in his name. This prefect held powers normally reserved for the emperor himself, reflecting Egypt's unique status. The first prefect, Cornelius Gallus, installed a garrison in Alexandria and methodically extinguished remnants of Ptolemaic resistance, establishing Roman dominance while simultaneously commemorating his achievements in hieroglyphic inscriptions. Adopting the very symbols of the civilization he helped subjugate, Egypt's extraordinary architectural fertility made it indispensable to Rome. The province delivered 1/3 of all grain consumed in the imperial capital, with specialized ships transporting over 150,000 tons annually up to Tiber. This economic lifeline was so crucial that Augustus established a military unit dedicated solely to guarding the grain shipments. When Emperor Vespasian seized power in 69 CE, he secured control of Egypt first, knowing that whoever controlled its grain could starve Rome into a music submission. Roman engineering transformed the landscape with new canals, irrigation systems, and agricultural technologies that maximized production. The Fiume region, already productive under the Ptolemies, expanded dramatically as Roman hydraulic expertise turned marginal lands into verdant fields. This intensification came at a cost. Egyptian farmers bore crushing tax burdens, with some villagers abandoning their homes rather than face Roman tax collectors. Music, perhaps most striking, was how Roman emperors embraced pharaonic imagery while simultaneously dismantling Egyptian independence. Temple walls at Dendera, Ina, and Philae show Roman emperors performing traditional offering rituals, their names enclosed in royal carts. At Caobo, Emperor Tiberius appears in the classic Pharaonic stance, 1 foot forward, arms rigid, wearing the double crown, a scene indistinguishable from those carved 2,000 years earlier. The temple at Tentor, now in New York's Metropolitan Museum, bears hieroglyphics, praising Augustus as son of Ra, lord of the two lands. Alexandria remained the intellectual centerpiece of the Mediterranean world, where cultures collided and transformed each other. Greek philosophers debated alongside Jewish theologians, like Pharaonic priests, maintained ancient traditions even as their script became increasingly restricted to temple contexts. The city's famous library continued to attract scholars, though it never fully recovered from damage sustained during Caesar's Alexandrian War. Roman officials, Greek merchants, and Egyptian craftsmen created a cosmopolitan society, unlike anywhere else in the ancient world. Music, the traditional religious landscape, gradually shifted as Greek and Latin replaced Egyptian in official contexts. While temple construction continued under early Roman rule, particularly during the reigns of Caligula and Nero. Christianity's growth gradually eroded ancient practices. By the late 4th century CE, when Emperor Theodosius banned pagan worship, many temples had already fallen into disuse. The Temple of Isis at Philae stood as the last functioning Egyptian temple until 537 CE, when Justinian finally ordered its closure. While Rome brought administrative efficiency through standardized weights, measures, and currency, they simultaneously introduced systematic exploitation. The province was divided into approximately 40 administrative districts, each meticulously documented through census records and tax assessments. Romans viewed Egypt primarily as a resource to be extracted with little interest in cultural preservation beyond what served imperial music propaganda. Egypt's story is one of resilience. For 3,000 years, it adapted, outro-absorbing invaders, mastering new tools, and blending cultures while staying uniquely Egyptian. Its secret, adapting without losing identity,